Hi friends, Hal here. Today we're going to talk about intervals, and the first chord that I played there was an E9, and then it was a D9, and then it was an A9, back to E9. That is a song that my son wrote, and it's a beautiful song. I love that song. But if I were to say to you, play an E9 for me, do you know how to figure out what the name of the note is to put onto the E chord to make it a 9, to make it an E9? Or the name of the note to put on to the D chord to make it a D9? Or do you just know those notes or those chords? You just have it memorized. Well, what if you have a chord that isn't memorized, like E flat 9? What do you do with that? It's like, oh, I've never played E flat 9 before. Well, if you understand intervals and how chords work, which is what we're getting to soon, then you can figure out what 11ths and 13ths are, and ninths and flat 9s and flat 5s and 4s and sus2s and sus4s and all those kinds of things, because those are intervals. So let's get into intervals and I'll show you how that works. Intervals, let's define intervals. An interval is a combination of two notes, or it's the distance between two notes. For instance, if I play these two notes, then I could ask you, what is the interval? What is that interval? Or these two notes, what is that interval? Or these two notes, what is that interval? If I have you play a note, let's say, and I play a note, and they're exactly the same note, like that D and this D. Okay, I can do it here on my guitar, right? Because I can play this note, just like when we tune our guitars, right? So if I play two notes together, that's a unison. That's the name of one of the intervals. There are actually 13 different intervals, and then there are something called compound intervals. Because the intervals within the octave, that means if you have a note, and then you go up to the next note, that's an octave, that's another interval. So already we've talked about the unison and the octave. Now let's name the intervals in between the unison and the octave. There are 11 different intervals between any octave. Let's talk about the notes in a major scale again. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, right? Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. That's a scale. You know what? We are going to talk more about scales before we get done here. And we're going to talk about notes in the scale, intervals within that scale. I'm going to show you the notes on the guitar, and I'm also going to show you the notes on the piano, so that you actually see them in different ways and hear them in different ways. So here's the C going to the D, and you can hear that. And those two notes kind of fight against each other. They actually are a dissonant interval. We'll talk about dissonance and consonants later. All right? That's called a major second, from C to D. Now if we go from C to E, that's called a major third. And I'll show you on the piano in a second how we get the names, like major second, major third. And then if we go from C to E, F, if we go from C to F, that's what we call a perfect fourth. Okay? And if we go to the fifth note and play C and G, that's called a perfect fifth. And then if we go from C to A, that's called a major sixth. If we go from C to B, C to B, that's called a major seventh. And then if we go all the way up to the octave, the C, that's called the octave. So we have the C to C, you know, if I have that C and that C playing at the same time, that's a unison. C to D, major second, C to E, major third, C to F, perfect fourth, C to G, perfect fifth, C to A, major sixth, C to B, major seventh, C to C, perfect octave. But we don't usually call that a perfect octave. We usually just call it an octave. But the official name is perfect octave. So there are 4 intervals that are perfect. There's the unison, perfect unison. There's the perfect fourth, perfect fifth, and perfect octave. The other ones, the second, the third, the sixth, and the seventh, those are major. Okay, let's look at those on the piano and see them a little differently. If you'll see some of the other videos that we did, the theory videos, you'll know that we talked about the 2 black keys and the 3 black keys. So right here, the 2 black keys, that's a C note for those of you who don't really play the piano. And here is a C note. So we're going from C to C. If I play a C on the piano and you play a C on the guitar, that would be the unison. Now I can't play 2 C's on the piano, I can only play 1. So here is the scale. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, like that. And there's the scale. So from C to D is a major second. And what we do when we talk about intervals, we actually count the one we're starting on, 1, 2, like that. We don't go 1, but we actually count the note we're starting on to see what the interval is. 1, 2, that's a major second. 1, 2, 3. That's a major third. 1, 2, 3. If we go up, C to F, perfect fourth. 1, 2, 3, 4. C to G is 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's a 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then the octave. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. See that? All right. So what we've got here is a major second, a major third, perfect fourth, perfect fifth, major sixth, major seventh, perfect octave, or octave. And there you go. When you have 2 different notes and you're trying to find the interval, whatever they are, you think of this as being like your keynote, or 1, and this one as being the distance to it. Now you could go down and do the same thing, but right now we're just going to talk about it going up. So now we've talked about the major and perfect intervals in the octave on the white keys. Now let's talk about them on the black keys. This note right here, we can call it a C sharp or we can call it a D flat. Okay, we're going to give it the name of D flat at the moment. C to D flat. All right. Now that is 2 different notes. So it's 1, 2. So that is a second also. But now this is called a minor second. This was a major second. This is a minor second. C to E was a major third. C to E flat is a minor third. Let's not talk about this one for a minute. Let's skip over the F sharp or the G flat. Let's go to the A flat. This is an A. C, D, E, F, G, A. C to A was a major sixth. C to A flat is a minor sixth. C to B is a major seventh. C to B flat is a minor 7. So far we've talked about the perfect intervals, 4th, 5th, and octave, and the unison. We've talked about the major 2nd, 3rd, 6th, and 7th, the minor 2nd and 3rd, 6th, and 7th. And let's see, we've covered everything except the F sharp. This is an interesting one because if you go from C to F, that's called a perfect 4th. If you call it C to F sharp, that's called an augmented 4th. Augmented means it's larger. So that can be called an augmented 4th. Now, if you call that a G flat, C to G is perfect 5th, but C to G flat is the same sounding interval as F sharp. But if it's written C to G flat, then we call it a diminished 5th. But if you're listening to it, you can't tell what the notes are except you know what the sound is. And it's a dissonant sound. It doesn't sound good. So really what we've got here is we've got what we call a tritone. And that's a tritone. I think what we'll do is we'll talk about some of the other diminished and augmented intervals as we go along. And I won't name them all right at this second. But let's go back to the piano, and I want to show you something about consonance and dissonance and how things sound good together and how things don't always sound good together. Let's listen to these intervals. Okay, now this piano itself isn't perfectly in tune. It's pretty close, but it's not perfect. So you can hear a little bit of beating there, but the octave sounds pretty good. That's a consonant interval. The intervals that sound good together are called consonant intervals. The perfect 5th sounds good together. The perfect 4th sounds good. Those two intervals sound great. The major 3rd sounds really good. The minor 3rd sounds good. The major 6th sounds good. The minor 6th sounds good. So those are all consonant intervals. The intervals that don't sound good together and that clash are the minor 2nd, the major 2nd, the tritone, the major 7th, the minor 7th, and the major 7th. Those are all dissonant intervals. When we talk about consonance and dissonance, it's kind of interesting because I think of consonants as being sounds that sound good together, and dissonant intervals or dissonance are sounds that don't sound good together. But here's a definition that is also out there. The terms consonance and dissonance have nothing to do with sounds being pleasing or harsh. Now, I always thought that they did, but it says that they don't in this particular book that I'm looking at. But they deal instead with a sense of motion within the musical context. What this means is when we have something that's dissonant, it feels like it needs to move. Dissonance also creates tension in music. All music represents a combination of an urgency to move and a feeling of stability, and the development of tension and release of tension. So what do we mean by urgency to move? What do we mean of stability? What do we mean by tension? And what do we mean by the release of this tension? I should probably not do that while I plug this in. Okay, what do we mean by the urgency to move as opposed to a feeling of stability? And what do we mean by a development of tension as opposed to the release of tension? This is the same thing that happens in everyday living. If you actually have let's say there's two people and they're talking together and all of a sudden they start getting into an argument. How do you feel about that? What do you want to do? How does it make you feel? I want them to resolve the argument. I don't like arguments. I mean, especially really hard ones. Sometimes I'll try to break up the argument, or I'll try to be the intermediary between people and help them to come to more of an understanding. Have you ever done that? Some people do that, and some people just run away. And sometimes I feel like just running away from an argument. Well, that's the sense of urgency, or the urgency to move, because we want something to happen. But if everything's really peaceful, if we're sitting in a room and we're just having a great time, we're reading a book, or we're just kind of contemplating something, or we're playing some music, and we're feeling peace, and we don't have a sense of urgency to move, we feel a sense of stability. Okay? An urgency to move would be like if it gets cold in the room, I want to get up and turn on the heat so I get warmer. Urgency to move would be if, suddenly a ball came through the window, then I would either run out and find out what was going on and find out who did that or what happened. I just wouldn't go, oh, isn't that nice? I would do something about it. Well, in music, when we hear pleasant notes, right? Now right there, don't you expect it to go back to here maybe? Maybe this note? See that? There's an urgency to move with that, even though I was doing it slowly. Well, intervals have the same thing. They have the same feeling. When I play this major second, the C and the D together, right? What do you want to do? If I do this continually, kind of makes you, it increases the tension because they're dissonant. But if I resolve it, dissonance, consonance. Now these two notes that I'm playing here are a C and an E, which are part of the C chord. But the C and the D clash against each other, and they have this dissonant sound. Sound good when it's when I resolve it. See that? You can feel it. Tension, relaxation, tension, relaxation. That's what we're talking about when we talk about consonance and dissonance. So these intervals that clash against each other, they have a tendency to want to move to a state of stability. That instability to stability, or the tension to release of tension. We do the same thing if you think about it in our own lives. If you sit on a tack, you're not going to go, oh, that hurts, and just sit there. You're going to jump up, right? If somebody pinches you, what do? Well, you just don't go, oh yeah, that feels great. I mean, sometimes we do that, right? Just to annoy people. But people know that if you tickle them, they're going to run away from you or something like that. Or if you scare them, what do? They jump. It's because of that tension, and we want to relax it. Okay, music does the same thing. It's interesting how it works like that in life. We can draw parallels from life to what happens in music because that's what we relate to. All right, we've talked about the different intervals today a little bit. We will talk more about those intervals and how they're augmented and diminished and other things like that. But basically, that's the intervals. Well, thank you, friends, for being with me today to talk about intervals. I hope that was okay for you. Thank you for coming along. We'll talk to you later. Take care.